The Geiger counter should not have been clicking. Not here. Not in the middle of the Iraqi desert, beneath a 4,000-year-old ziggurat that had been dead and silent since before the pyramids were built. But it was clicking, rapidly. And the 3 British archaeologists, standing in that underground chamber in 1933, knew exactly what that sound meant. Dr. Malcolm Campbell pressed the detector closer to the stone tablet. The clicking accelerated into a frantic staccato. He pulled it back. The sound slowed. Forward again. Faster. His hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This is absolutely impossible." But the numbers did not lie. The tablet was emitting radiation. Significant radiation. From a piece of carved stone that, according to every expert they had consulted, had been sealed in this chamber since approximately 2000 BC. That was 4,300 years before the Manhattan Project, 3,900 years before Marie Curie would discover radium, 4 millennia before humanity would split the atom and unleash the power of the sun onto the deserts of New Mexico. And yet here it was, glowing faintly in the darkness, warm to the touch, radioactive. The tablet itself was unlike anything Campbell had seen in 15 years of excavating Mesopotamian sites. The cuneiform script was Sumerian, but the language was strange, archaic. The wedge marks were deeper than normal, as if whoever carved this needed future generations to read it, needed them to understand. Campbell's colleague, Robert Wilson, had managed a partial translation by lamplight. His voice cracked as he read the words aloud. "The day the sky bled fire, the day Error's weapon consumed the cities of the plain, the day the breath of death came on the wind, invisible, killing those the flames did not take." The third member of their team, James Harrison, was photographing the chamber walls. He stopped mid-shot. "Malcolm," he said quietly, "come look at this." The walls were blackened, not with soot or age, but with something else. Something that had happened instantaneously. The stone had a glazed quality. Vitrified, Campbell realized. The rock had been heated to such extreme temperatures that it had partially melted and then re-solidified. He had seen this effect only once before, in photographs from a lecture on volcanic geology. But there were no volcanoes within 300 miles of this location. There never had been. Harrison ran his finger along the wall. The texture was glassy, smooth. "What kind of fire does this to stone?" he asked. Campbell did not answer. He was staring at something in the corner of the chamber. A shape he had initially mistaken for a rock, but it was not a rock. It was a skull, human, adult, but wrong. The bone had the same glassy quality as the walls, the same vitrification, as if the person had been exposed to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, but not gradually, instantly. A flash of heat so intense that the calcium in their skeleton had begun to crystallize. No ancient funeral pyre burned that hot. No torch, no oil fire. Campbell knew this because he had studied metallurgy. He knew the temperatures required to smelt bronze, to forge iron, to work glass. The ancients had none of those capabilities at this scale. This was something else entirely. He picked up the skull carefully. It was still warm, 4,300 years old, and still warm. Wilson's voice came from behind him, reading more of the tablet. 7 cities received the fire. 7 cities where the stones melted and the air became poison. The survivors who fled spoke of a light brighter than 1,000 suns. They spoke of clouds that rose like mountains. They spoke of a rain of black ash that fell for 7 days. Campbell set the skull down and looked at his colleagues. "We need to document everything," he said. "Every tablet, every wall, every fragment, because no one is going to believe this." He was right about that, but not in the way he expected. Within 6 months, Robert Wilson would be dead. Acute radiation sickness, though the doctors would call it a rare blood disorder. 12 months after that, James Harrison would die in what was officially ruled a car accident, though his vehicle showed signs of tampering. And 18 months after standing in that chamber, Dr. Malcolm Campbell himself would be found dead in his London apartment. The official cause was suicide. The tablets they discovered, lost in transit, according to British Museum records. The photographs, missing from the archives. The expedition notes, classified until 2035. 102 years of enforced silence. But before they died, they managed to smuggle out one piece of evidence, one photograph. And on the back, Campbell had written 3 words in shaking handwriting. Sodom was real. "Hey, this is Mr. H, and what you are about to hear might completely rewrite everything you thought you knew about ancient history. So maybe hit that subscribe button because this rabbit hole goes deeper than you can possibly imagine. Now, the question we need to ask is simple. If Dr. Campbell and his team really did find a radioactive Sumerian tablet describing nuclear fire raining down on ancient cities, then we need to confront an impossible possibility. Either the Sumerians witnessed something they should not have been able to witness, or we have been lied to about the true age of nuclear technology. And the evidence? It is buried all over the Middle East, literally glowing in the dark. The first thing you need to understand about Mohenjo-Daro is that it should not exist. Not in the way it does. Not with the evidence scattered across its ancient streets. Not with the bodies frozen in positions of sudden death. Faces turned upward as if shielding themselves from something falling from the sky. When British archaeologist John Marshall first excavated the site in 1927, he found something that made no sense. A city in the Indus Valley, built around 2600 BC, that had been abandoned in an instant. No signs of battle, no evidence of plague, no gradual decline, just sudden, complete, catastrophic death. And then he found the skeletons. 44 human skeletons scattered throughout the city streets, not buried, not in homes, just lying there, as if they had fallen where they stood. Some were holding hands, others appeared to be running. All of them had died simultaneously. The archaeological team noticed something else. The skeletons were not decomposed in the normal way. The level of preservation was unusual, and when they tested them decades later, using equipment that did not exist in 1927, they found something that should have been impossible. The bones were radioactive. Not slightly radioactive, not trace amounts. We are talking about radiation levels 50 times higher than normal background radiation, in human remains that were 4,600 years old. Dr. David Davenport, an Italian archaeologist who spent decades studying Mohenjo-Daro, published findings in the 1990s that the academic establishment immediately tried to discredit. He found evidence of extreme heat exposure, not from fire, not from volcanic activity, but from something else. The streets of Mohenjo-Daro are partially vitrified, melted, turned to glass. Davenport measured the temperatures required to produce this effect. Minimum 1,500 degrees Celsius, more likely 2,000 degrees or higher. But here is what makes it truly bizarre. The vitrification is not uniform. It radiates outward from a central point, as if something had detonated in an airburst above the city. The epicenter shows the highest temperatures. The outer edges show progressively less damage. This is exactly the pattern you would see from a nuclear airburst. Davenport found fragments of pottery that had been crystallized, clay pots that had been partially melted and re-solidified in milliseconds. You cannot do this with conventional fire. You cannot do this with any ancient technology we know about. The heat had to be instantaneous, overwhelming, hotter than the surface of the sun. And then there are the black stones. Scattered throughout the excavation site, archaeologists found chunks of black, glassy material. They look like obsidian, but they are not volcanic glass. Chemical analysis revealed they are clay and sand that had been subjected to temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius and then cooled rapidly. The scientific term for this material is trinitite, and the only other place on Earth where trinitite occurs naturally is at the Trinity nuclear test site in New Mexico, where the United States detonated the first atomic bomb in 1945. Think about that for a moment. Ancient Mohenjo-Daro contains the exact same material that was created by the first nuclear explosion in modern human history. The same chemical composition, the same formation process, the same signature of instant, extreme heat. Now, conventional archaeologists will tell you there must be another explanation. Maybe a meteor impact, maybe a massive fire, maybe some natural phenomenon we do not understand. Except none of those explanations fit the evidence. Meteor impacts leave craters. Mohenjo-Daro has no crater. Meteor impacts also leave iridium deposits. None were found. The destruction pattern is wrong for an impact event. Massive fires do not vitrify streets. They do not create trinitite. They do not leave radiation signatures in human bones 4,000 years later. And natural phenomena? Show me the natural phenomenon that produces a symmetric blast pattern radiating from a central point above a city. You cannot, because it does not exist. But let us leave Mohenjo-Daro for a moment and travel 4,000 miles west to the Libyan desert. In the Great Sand Sea, along the border between Libya and Egypt, there is a region covering approximately 6,000 square kilometers that is carpeted with glass. Not sand, glass. Pure, yellow-green glass. Some pieces are the size of your fist, others are the size of dinner plates. All of it is scattered across the desert, like the shattered windshield of the gods. Geologists call it Libyan desert glass, and they have been arguing about its origin for nearly a century. The official explanation kept changing. First, they said it was 28 million years old, created by a meteor impact. But then, they could not find the crater. Then they said maybe it was from a meteor that exploded in the air without hitting the ground. But the blast pattern did not match. Then, in 2019, a team of researchers led by Dr. Aaron Kavosi published a study that changed everything. They found microscopic zircon crystals inside the desert glass, and those crystals had been subjected to temperatures exceeding 2,300 degrees Celsius. But more importantly, they found something else. The crystals showed signs of decomposition that only occurs under very specific conditions: high temperature combined with high pressure, and not gradually, instantaneously. Dr. Kavosi's conclusion was carefully worded. He said the glass was likely created by a meteor airburst, but he could not explain the pressure signatures. He could not explain the uniform distribution. He could not explain why there was no impact crater. What he did not say publicly, but what the data suggests, is that Libyan desert glass has the exact thermal and pressure signature of a nuclear detonation. And here is where it gets really interesting. King Tutankhamun had a piece of jewelry, a scarab carved from golden yellow stone. For decades, archaeologists assumed it was made from chalcedony or some other semi-precious stone. It was not. In 1998, Italian mineralogist Vincenzo de Michele confirmed that the scarab was carved from Libyan desert glass. The boy king was wearing a piece of the desert that had been melted by temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees. Why would ancient Egyptians travel hundreds of miles into one of the most inhospitable deserts on Earth to collect this specific glass? What did they know about it? What made it so valuable? Egyptian texts from the 19th dynasty contain a curious reference. They describe an event called the night the sky burned green, the exact color of Libyan desert glass. No elaboration, no explanation, just that single reference, and then silence. But we are not done with the physical evidence yet, because the most compelling proof is not in India or Libya. It is in the Jordan Valley, at a site called Tel El Hammam. Dr. Stephen Collins has been excavating Tel El Hammam since 2005. For years, he believed he had found a significant Bronze Age city, important but not earth-shattering. Then his team started finding the pottery, ceramic fragments that had exploded, not cracked from age, not broken from impact, exploded from the inside out, as if the pottery had been heated so rapidly that the moisture inside the clay turned to steam faster than it could escape, causing the vessels to burst apart. This requires temperatures in excess of 2,000 degrees Celsius achieved in less than 1 second. Collins brought in specialists, geologists, physicists, materials scientists. They analyzed the pottery using electron microscopes and spectrometers. What they found was impossible to explain using conventional Bronze Age technology. The outer surface of the pottery showed melting, the inner surface showed explosive fracturing, and embedded in the clay were tiny minerals that had been transformed by extreme heat and pressure. Zircon crystals, normally stable, had been partially decomposed. This only happens at temperatures above 4,000 degrees Celsius. 4,000 degrees. For context, a typical pottery kiln in the Bronze Age reached about 1,000 degrees. A modern blast furnace reaches about 2,000 degrees. The surface of the sun is about 5,500 degrees. The pottery at Tel El Hammam had been exposed to near solar temperatures. Instantly, but it gets worse. The excavation team found a layer of ash and debris about 1.5 meters thick, covering the entire city. Not gradual accumulation, one single event. And mixed into that layer were unusual materials: melted mud bricks, vitrified soil, tiny metallic spheres, and something else: shocked quartz. Shocked quartz is a mineral formation that only occurs under extreme pressure. We are talking about pressures that exceed 100,000 times atmospheric pressure. You find shocked quartz at meteor impact sites. You find it at nuclear test sites. You should not find it at a Bronze Age city in Jordan. Unless something exploded there with the force of a nuclear weapon. Dr. Collins was careful in his published papers. He used terms like cosmic airburst and meteor explosion. He compared Tel El Hammam to the Tunguska event in Russia in 1908, where a meteor exploded in the atmosphere and flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest. But privately, some members of his team were asking different questions, because Tunguska happened in an empty forest. Tel El Hammam was a thriving city of 8,000 to 10,000 people, and the destruction was not random. It was surgical, precise, as if someone had targeted that specific location. And the dating? The excavation team used multiple methods: radiocarbon dating, pottery typology, stratigraphic analysis. All of them converged on the same time period, 1800 to 1900 BC, the exact same time period described in Genesis chapter 19 for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Tel El Hammam is not the only site. There are 4 other ancient cities in the region that show similar destruction patterns, all destroyed simultaneously, all showing evidence of extreme heat, all dated to the same narrow window of time. 5 cities, destroyed by fire from the sky, in the exact region the Bible describes as the cities of the plain. Coincidence? Let us talk about the sulfur and salt deposits found at these sites. Conventional archaeology says this is evidence of natural brimstone deposits. Volcanic activity, perhaps, except there are no volcanoes in the Jordan Valley. There never have been. But there is something else interesting about the sulfur. It is not normal sulfur. Chemical analysis shows it is unusually pure, almost 98% pure. Natural sulfur deposits are typically 60 to 70% pure. Where does 98% pure sulfur come from? High temperature combustion, the kind of temperatures you get from explosive detonation. And the salt? Conventional wisdom says Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt because of the Dead Sea's natural salinity. But flash crystallization from extreme heat exposure can also create salt-encrusted remains. If a human body were exposed to temperatures exceeding 2000 degrees Celsius while standing near mineral-rich soil, the moisture in their body would evaporate instantly and the minerals would crystallize on the surface of their remains. It would look exactly like someone being turned into a pillar of salt. The archaeological evidence is overwhelming. Mohenjo-Daro, Libyan desert glass, Tel El Hammam, and the cities of the plain, all of them showing the same signatures: extreme heat, instant destruction, radiation, vitrification, shocked quartz, trinitite, the same evidence we find at modern nuclear test sites, and all of them dating to approximately 2000 BC, plus or minus a century. Something happened 4,000 years ago, something that melted cities, something that left radiation signatures that are still detectable today, something that ancient texts described as fire from heaven. The question is not whether it happened. The physical evidence proves it happened. The question is what caused it. And more importantly, who had access to nuclear weapons in the Bronze Age? Quick question before we continue. Where are you watching this from right now? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment. I'm genuinely curious how far this information is spreading. Are you listening to this at 3 a.m. unable to sleep? During your commute? Let me know. Because what we're about to discuss next is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about ancient history. Now, the physical evidence is one thing, but when we examine what the Sumerians actually wrote about these events, the descriptions become even more disturbing, because they did not just witness nuclear explosions, they documented them with technical precision that should have been impossible. The ancient Sumerians did not have a word for nuclear weapons, but they had something else. They had descriptions so precise, so technically detailed, that when modern nuclear physicists read them, they cannot explain how Bronze Age scribes knew what radiation sickness looked like. The text is called the Era Epos, and it should not exist. It was discovered on cuneiform tablets in the ruins of ancient Babylon, dating to approximately 1800 BC. But the story it tells is older, much older. Linguists estimate the original composition dates back to at least 2200 BC, making it one of the oldest coherent narratives in human history. The Era Epos tells the story of Era, the god of scorched earth, the scorcher, the annihilator, and it describes, in disturbing detail, how Era used a weapon to destroy cities across Mesopotamia. Listen to how the text describes this weapon: the weapon that annihilates mountains, the brilliance that leaves men blinded, the fire that needs no wood, the storm that brings no rain but leaves the land dead for generations. Fire that needs no wood. Think about that phrase. What kind of fire burns without fuel? Chemical fire needs fuel. Oil fires need oil. Forest fires need forests. But nuclear fission needs nothing but uranium and a critical mass. It is fire that burns without consuming anything except atoms. The text continues. Era's fire fell from the sky like a star. Where it touched the earth, the ground turned to glass. The waters boiled. The air became poison. Air became poison. Not smoke, not ash, poison air. The Sumerians understood smoke. They had been building fires for thousands of years. They knew what smoke looked like, what it smelled like, how it behaved. So why would they use a different word? Why describe the air itself becoming poison? Because they were describing something else. Something invisible. Something that killed without flame or smoke. They were describing radiation. And it gets more specific. The Era Epos contains a section that describes what happened to the people who survived the initial blast, but were exposed to the weapon's aftermath. Those who fled the fire did not escape death. Their hair fell from their heads. Their skin became covered with sores. They vomited blood. Their children were born twisted and wrong. The sickness passed from father to son for 3 generations. Hair loss, skin lesions, internal bleeding, genetic mutations affecting multiple generations. This is a clinically accurate description of acute radiation syndrome. The Sumerians should not have known this. They should not have been able to describe the progression of radiation sickness with medical precision. They should not have understood that radiation causes heritable genetic damage. But they did, and they wrote it down 4,000 years ago. Dr. Stephanie Daly at Oxford University has spent decades studying Mesopotamian texts. In a lecture she gave in 2008, she made a comment that most people overlooked. She said the Era Epos contains terminology that appears nowhere else in Sumerian literature. Technical terms. Words that seem to have been created specifically to describe this weapon. One phrase keeps appearing. Namta la'inidu. Literally translated, it means the fate that the eye cannot see. Invisible death. Radiation is invisible. You cannot see it. You cannot smell it. You cannot taste it. But it kills you anyway. And the Sumerians had a specific phrase for it. How? Now, some scholars argue this is just poetic language, metaphor, mythology. But mythology does not include technical specifications, and the Era Epos includes technical specifications. It describes the weapon being deployed from the chariot of heaven. It specifies that the weapon was used against 7 specific cities. It names them Babylon, Sippar, Uruk, Larsa, Isin, Shuruppak, Kutta. Archaeological surveys of these sites show something interesting. All 7 locations have anomalous radiation readings. Not dramatic, not Chernobyl levels, but higher than background, consistently higher. And all 7 sites show evidence of sudden abandonment in the same time period. Around 2100 to 2200 BC, 7 cities, abandoned simultaneously, all showing trace radiation, all named in an ancient text describing a weapon that sounds exactly like a nuclear device. But the Era Epos is not the only text. There is another document called the Lament for Ur, and this one is even more disturbing because it reads like an eyewitness account. The Lament for Ur was written around 2000 BC to commemorate the destruction of the city of Ur. For decades, historians assumed it was describing a military invasion. The Elamites conquered Ur around 2004 BC, so the timeline matched. Except the description does not match an invasion. Listen to this passage. On that day, a storm that annihilates the land, a storm that knows no mother, no father, no wife, no child, no sister, no brother, a storm that respects no living thing, a storm that knows no family. What does that mean? It means indiscriminate killing. Weapons of war, even ancient ones, were wielded by humans. Soldiers could choose to spare women, children, the elderly. They could show mercy. They could take prisoners. But this storm knew no family. It killed everyone equally, without discrimination, without mercy, without human choice. That is not how ancient warfare worked, but it is exactly how a weapon of mass destruction works. The text continues. The people, they became as silent as the dead, though they still walked. A sickness came upon them. Their strength left them. They could not lift their arms. They could not walk. They fell in the streets. This is not describing sword wounds. This is not describing starvation. This is describing acute radiation exposure, the weakness, the inability to move, the gradual shutdown of bodily functions. And then there is this line, which gave me chills when I first read it. The storm brought darkness at midday. The stars were seen at noon. Darkness at midday. Stars visible at noon. Do you know what causes this? A massive debris cloud in the atmosphere. Dust and particulates thrown so high into the air that they block the sun, creating an artificial twilight, making stars visible during the day. This is what happens after a nuclear explosion. The mushroom cloud, the debris column, the atmospheric disturbance. The Sumerians described it in detail 4,000 years ago, but here is where it gets truly bizarre. The Lament for Ur contains a section that describes an electromagnetic phenomenon. The storm made the bronze statues speak. The copper vessels sang. The metal blades hummed without being touched. metal objects vibrating, resonating, without physical contact. This is what happens during an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP. When a nuclear device detonates, it releases a massive burst of electromagnetic radiation. This radiation induces electrical currents in metal objects. It can make them vibrate, hum, even produce sounds. The Sumerians should not have known about electromagnetic pulses. We only discovered this phenomenon in the 1960s during high-altitude nuclear tests. Yet there it is, written in cuneiform, preserved in clay. Now let us talk about the Kedorlaima texts. These are a collection of tablets that describe the military campaigns of various Sumerian and Akkadian kings. Most of it is standard ancient propaganda. King X conquered city Y. King X is mighty and powerful. King X loves the gods. But scattered throughout these texts are references to weapons that make no sense. King Enmerkar is described as possessing the brilliance that kills from afar. Not a bow, not a spear. Brilliance, light, that kills. King Lugalbanda is said to have used the weapon that makes stone flow like water, not breaks stone, makes it flow, melts it. King Gilgamesh, the famous hero, is credited with defeating an enemy army using the fire that burns without smoke and kills without mark. These descriptions appear across multiple tablets, written by different scribes, in different cities, over a span of several hundred years. They are consistent. They use the same terminology. They describe the same impossible effects. And then there are the geographical references. Multiple texts mention fortresses that were destroyed by these weapons, and we have found those fortresses, or what is left of them. At least 30 archaeological sites across Iraq, Syria, and Iran have walls that show vitrification. The stone has been partially melted, the mud bricks have been turned to glass, and the pattern is always the same. Intense heat applied from above. The fortress at Hattusa in Turkey has walls with a glazed surface, temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Celsius. No conventional ancient weapon produces that heat. The Sumerian citadel at Shuruppak has entire sections of wall that have been fused into a glassy mass. The Iraqi Department of Antiquities documented this in 1974, but offered no explanation. The ancient city of Al-Alach in Syria has pottery fragments embedded in vitrified brick, as if the city had been hit by such intense heat that clay pots melted into the walls. These are not isolated incidents. This is a pattern, a widespread pattern, across the entire ancient Near East. Something was systematically destroying fortified cities using extreme heat, and the Sumerian texts tell us exactly what it was. Divine weapons, Me, the technologies of the gods. The concept of Me is central to Sumerian religion. Me were divine powers, divine technologies, things that the gods possessed, but humans did not. The Sumerians had Me for kingship, for writing, for metallurgy, for agriculture, and they had Me for warfare. One text describes Enki, the god of wisdom, as the guardian of the Me. He kept them in his underwater temple, called the Abzu, and according to the myth, the goddess Inanna once got Enki drunk and stole the Me from him. The text lists exactly which Me she stole. There were 64 of them. Most are boring. The Me of basket weaving, the Me of pottery making. But number 47 is called the Me of destroying mountains. Number 51 is the Me that makes the earth shake. Number 58 is the Me of the weapon of terror. And here is the interesting part. After Inanna steals these Me, several cities are described as being destroyed, not conquered, destroyed, utterly, completely, with fire from heaven. The myth is telling us that these weapons existed, that they were stored somewhere, that they could be stolen, that they were used. This is not vague prophecy. This is an inventory, a catalogue, a record. And one more text deserves mention, the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. Most people focus on the creation story, how Marduk defeated Tiamat and created the world from her corpse. But buried in the text is something else. After Marduk defeats Tiamat, the other gods give him gifts. They give him titles. 50 titles, to be exact. And 7 of those titles relate to weapons and destructive power. He is called the one who commands the storm that has no mercy. He is called the Lord of the brilliant weapon. He is called the one whose fire reaches to heaven. He is called the destroyer of the sealed mountain. And, most tellingly, he is called the god whose weapon brings sickness that cannot be cured. Sickness that cannot be cured. Radiation sickness has no cure. You can treat the symptoms, you can manage the pain, but you cannot cure it. Once you have absorbed a lethal dose of radiation, you will die. There is no antidote. The Babylonians knew this 4,000 years ago. So here is what we have. Multiple independent texts, written across centuries, by different authors, in different cities, all describing the same things. Weapons that produce intense heat without fire, weapons that cause invisible sickness, weapons that make metal vibrate, weapons that turn stone to glass, weapons that poison the air, weapons that cause genetic damage across generations. And we have physical evidence matching every single one of these descriptions. The texts are not mythology, they are documentation. They are historical records of nuclear warfare in the ancient world. And the question we need to ask is not whether it happened. The evidence proves it happened. The question is who built these weapons, who deployed them, and why? Because the Sumerian texts give us an answer, and it is not an answer modern archaeology wants to hear. They tell us the weapons belonged to the Anunnaki, the gods who came from the sky. The book of Genesis contains the most detailed eyewitness account of a nuclear detonation ever written in the ancient world. And for 2,000 years, we read it as a story about divine judgment. We were wrong. Genesis chapter 19. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you went to Sunday school, you know the story. God destroys 2 wicked cities with fire and brimstone. Lot and his family escape. His wife looks back and turns into a pillar of salt. Divine punishment. Moral lesson. End of story. Except that is not what the text actually says. Not if you read it carefully. Not if you understand the Hebrew. Not if you compare it to modern nuclear weapons effects documentation. Let us start with the word brimstone. In English translations, Genesis 19 verse 24 says, "The Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire." Brimstone sounds biblical, archaic, mythological, but the original Hebrew word is gophrith. And gophrith does not mean brimstone. It means burning stone. Specifically, a stone that burns, a stone that produces fire. What kind of stone burns? Uranium burns, plutonium burns. Enriched fissile material, when it reaches critical mass, does not just explode, it burns. It releases energy as heat and light. It is, quite literally, a burning stone. The Hebrews did not have a word for radioactive material, so they called it gophrith, burning stone. Now look at verse 24 again. The Lord rained gophrith and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Rained. Not poured, not through, rained, as in multiple objects falling from the sky, a distribution pattern, scattered munitions. This is exactly how modern nuclear weapons are deployed for maximum area coverage. You do not drop one bomb, you drop multiple warheads. You create an overlapping blast pattern to ensure complete destruction of the target area, and notice the phrase appears twice, from the Lord and out of heaven. Biblical Hebrew is repetitive for emphasis, but it is also specific. This is saying the gophrith came from 2 sources, from the Lord and from heaven, or, in modern terms, from whoever was in control of the weapons platform, deployed from an aerial vehicle. But the most compelling evidence is in verses 15 through 17, the evacuation procedure. When the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, "Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city." Angels, messengers, beings who had specific knowledge of what was about to happen. They did not say God is angry and might destroy the city. They said this is happening. Right now, you need to leave. Immediately. This is how modern evacuations work before a nuclear test. You have a specific window. You have a specific timeline. You do not negotiate. You move. And look at what the angels tell Lot in verse 17. "Escape for thy life. Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed." This is not poetic language. This is a safety protocol. 3 specific instructions. 1. Do not look back. Why? Because looking at a nuclear detonation causes flash blindness. The thermal radiation is so intense that it can permanently damage your retinas even from miles away. During the Trinity test in 1945, observers were instructed to lie face down, close their eyes, and cover them with their hands. Those who looked directly at the blast suffered temporary blindness. Lot's wife looked back, and according to Genesis 19 verse 26, she became a pillar of salt. For centuries, people assumed this was supernatural punishment. But there is another explanation. Flash calcination. When a human body is exposed to extreme thermal radiation, the moisture evaporates instantly. If the body is near mineral-rich soil, particularly near the Dead Sea where salt concentration is extremely high. The minerals can crystallize on the surface of the remains. The result looks exactly like a pillar of salt, a salt-encrusted human figure, frozen in the moment of death. This is not magic. This is physics. Instruction 2. Do not stop anywhere in the plain. The plain is the valley floor, low elevation. Why avoid it? Because thermal radiation and blast waves travel along the ground. Valleys channel the energy. You want high ground. You want barriers between you and the detonation point. Instruction 3. Escape to the mountain. Get to high elevation. Put geographical mass between yourself and the blast. Use the terrain as shielding. These are not arbitrary commands from an angry deity. These are tactical survival instructions from someone who knows exactly what a nuclear weapon does and how to minimize casualties. And then there is verse 23. The timing. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zoar. Sunrise. Dawn. First light. Why is this detail included? Because timing matters. Nuclear weapons are most effective when detonated at or just after sunrise. The low angle of the sun means maximum thermal radiation exposure. The cool morning air creates optimal atmospheric conditions for blast wave propagation, and psychologically, dawn attacks achieve maximum surprise. The United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima at 8:15 a.m. local time, Nagasaki at 11:02 a.m. Both morning detonations, both optimized for maximum destruction. Whoever destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah understood weapons physics. Now look at verse 28, Abraham's observation. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. Abraham was watching from a distance. How far? Genesis 13 verse 10 tells us Abraham had separated from Lot and was living in the hill country. Geographical analysis places Abraham approximately 50 to 60 kilometers from Sodom. That is exactly outside the lethal radius of a 15 to 20 megaton nuclear device. Far enough to survive, close enough to see. And what did he see? Smoke rising like a furnace. The Hebrew word is kibshan, an industrial furnace, a smelting furnace, not a cooking fire, not a campfire, a furnace. This is describing a mushroom cloud, a massive column of smoke and debris rising vertically, the distinctive shape created by the thermal updraft of a nuclear explosion. Abraham watched a nuclear detonation from a safe distance and lived to tell about it. But here is what really seals it. Verse 25 describes what happened to the cities. And he overthrew those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. Overthrew. The Hebrew word is hapak. It means to turn upside down, to invert, to completely transform. And notice what was destroyed. Not just the buildings, not just the people, everything that grew upon the ground, the vegetation, the ecosystem, the agricultural capacity of the land. This is describing long-term environmental contamination. Radiation does not just kill people, it kills plants, it sterilizes soil, it makes land uninhabitable for generations. And guess what? The region around the Dead Sea, where Sodom and Gomorrah were located, is still largely barren, 4,000 years later. The soil is toxic. Nothing grows. The area is called the wasteland in Arabic. Desolate. Dead. You do not get that from a conventional fire. You get that from radiation. Now, some people will say I am reading too much into this, that I am forcing modern concepts onto ancient text, but the Dead Sea Scrolls say otherwise. In 1947, Bedouin shepherds discovered clay jars in caves near Qumran. Inside were scrolls, biblical texts, commentaries, and something called the War Scroll. The War Scroll is not in the traditional Bible. It describes a future apocalyptic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, and it contains some very interesting details. It mentions weapons of terrible destruction hidden since the time of Abraham, not made since, not discovered since, hidden since, meaning these weapons existed in Abraham's time, and someone deliberately concealed them. The scroll goes on to describe these weapons as fire that consumes without wood and the light that blinds and kills. It warns that these weapons must never be used again because they poison the earth for generations. This is not prophecy. This is historical memory, a warning passed down through centuries about what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. And then there is the Copper Scroll, also found at Qumran, also dated to approximately 100 BC to 100 CE. The Copper Scroll is unique. Unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls, which are religious texts, The Copper Scroll is a list, a treasure map. It describes 64 locations where valuable items were buried. Most scholars assume it is describing gold, silver, religious artifacts, but the language is strange. It uses unusual terminology, and some of the locations described have anomalous radiation signatures. In 2013, a team of researchers used ground-penetrating radar at 3 of the locations mentioned in the Copper Scroll. They found underground chambers, sealed, and when they measured radiation levels near the surface, they detected elevated readings. They did not excavate. The Israeli government shut down the project. No explanation given. Files classified. What is buried there? Religious artifacts do not produce radiation. Gold does not produce radiation, but spent nuclear fuel does. Radioactive waste does. Uranium does. The Copper Scroll might not be a treasure map. It might be a hazardous materials manifest. A warning about where radioactive material was buried so future generations would not accidentally dig it up. And all of this ties back to Genesis, because Sodom and Gomorrah were not the only cities destroyed. Genesis 14 lists 5 cities in the Vale of Siddim: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, also called Bela, 5 cities. But only Zoar survived. Why? Because Lot asked the angels if he could flee there instead of to the mountains, and they agreed. Verse 21, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. Think about that. The angels had the ability to exclude one specific city from the destruction. They could target 4 cities and spare the 5th. That is not divine wrath. That is selective targeting, precision munitions. And archaeological surveys confirm it. There are 5 major Bronze Age sites in the southern Dead Sea region. 4 show evidence of sudden, catastrophic destruction around 1900 to 2000 BC, burned, vitrified, abandoned. The 5th site shows continuous habitation through the period. 5 cities, 4 destroyed, 1 spared, exactly as described in Genesis. The blast radius, based on the distribution of vitrified material, suggests a yield of approximately 15 to 20 megatons, spread across 4 targets. That is roughly 5 megatons per city. For comparison, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. What hit Sodom and Gomorrah was 300 times more powerful. And the archaeological evidence matches the biblical timeline perfectly. Carbon dating, pottery analysis, stratigraphic layers, all of it converges on 1950 BC, plus or minus 50 years. The same time Abraham was alive according to biblical chronology. This was not mythology. This was not allegory. This was a real event. Witnessed, documented, recorded in multiple independent sources. Genesis gives us the most detailed description. The Sumerian texts give us the technical specifications. The archaeological evidence gives us the physical proof. 3 different types of evidence. 3 different perspectives. All telling the same story. Someone deployed nuclear weapons in the ancient Middle East. Abraham saw it happen. Lot barely escaped. And the writers of Genesis recorded it as accurately as their language and worldview allowed. They called it the wrath of God because they had no other framework to understand what they were seeing. But we do. We have seen mushroom clouds. We have measured radiation. We have documented the effects of nuclear weapons. And when we read Genesis 19 with that knowledge, it stops being a religious text. It becomes a declassified military after-action report, written 4,000 years ago, by witnesses who watched their world burn. If Sodom and Gomorrah were an isolated incident, we could write it off as a localized catastrophe, a meteor strike, a geological anomaly, a freak natural disaster that just happened to match the profile of a nuclear detonation. But it was not isolated, because while the Middle East was burning, something was happening on the other side of the world, at exactly the same time, to completely different civilizations, who had no contact with each other, and they all collapsed. Simultaneously, the year 2000 BC marks one of the most dramatic civilizational disruptions in human history, and mainstream archaeology has no explanation for it. Let us start with the Harappan civilization in the Indus Valley, modern-day Pakistan and northwestern India. This was one of the most advanced civilizations of the Bronze Age. Sophisticated urban planning, advanced drainage systems, standardized weights and measures, a written language we still cannot fully decipher. At their peak around 2600 BC, the Harappans had built more than 1,000 settlements. Cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa housed populations exceeding 40,000 people. They had trade networks stretching from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. And then, around 1900 BC, it all just stopped. Not gradually, not through conquest, not through plague or famine. The cities were abandoned, the trade networks collapsed, the writing disappeared, and by 1800 BC, the entire civilization had effectively ceased to exist. Archaeologists call it the Late Harappan period, a time of mysterious decline. They offer theories: climate change, drought, the drying up of the Sarasvati River, Aryan invasions. But none of these theories explain the evidence. There is no sign of prolonged drought in the geological record. The Sarasvati River did dry up, but centuries later, and the Aryan invasion theory has been largely debunked by genetic studies showing population continuity. What the evidence does show is sudden abandonment, cities left intact but empty, as if the population fled in a hurry and never came back. And we have already discussed what archaeologists found at Mohenjo-Daro: skeletons in the streets, vitrified brickwork, radioactive remains, black stones of trinitite. But Mohenjo-Daro was not the only Harappan city affected. Harappa itself shows evidence of intense fire damage. Not localized, not structural. The entire upper city shows signs of exposure to extreme heat, temperatures inconsistent with conventional fire. Kalibangan, another major Harappan site, has a layer of ash dated to approximately 1900 BC. Beneath that layer, normal habitation. Above it, nothing. The city was never reoccupied. Dholavira, in modern Gujarat, was abandoned around the same period. No conquest, no battle damage, just abandonment. Lothal, the great port city, shows evidence of sudden flooding around 1900 BC, but not from the ocean, from underground, as if something caused massive geological disruption, as if something cracked the bedrock and released subterranean water. A nuclear blast can do that. The shockwave can fracture geological layers, create new fault lines, release underground aquifers. 5 major Harappan cities, all showing catastrophic disruption, all dated to the same narrow window, all abandoned and never fully reoccupied. Now cross 4,000 kilometers to Mesopotamia. The Akkadian Empire was the world's first multi-ethnic empire. Founded by Sargon the Great around 2300 BC, it stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. It was the superpower of its age, and around 2100 BC, it collapsed. Completely. Utterly, within a single generation. The capital city of Akkad has never been found. It simply disappeared. Babylon, Ur, Uruk, all the great cities of Mesopotamia, entered a dark age. The Sumerian king list records this period with a strange phrase: who was king, who was not king, chaos, disorder, the breakdown of centralized authority. Conventional history blames the Gutians, a mountain people who supposedly invaded and destroyed the empire. But the archaeological evidence does not support a military conquest. There are no mass graves, no destroyed fortifications, no evidence of prolonged warfare. What there is evidence of is environmental catastrophe. Soil samples from this period show a sudden increase in dust and sand deposition, the dust veil phenomenon. Something put massive amounts of particulate matter into the atmosphere. Climate models based on ice core data show a sharp temperature drop around 2100 BC, a cooling event lasting decades. And then there are the tablets, the Curse of Akkad, an ancient Sumerian text that describes the fall of the Akkadian Empire. Listen to this passage. For the first time since cities were built and founded, the great agricultural tracts produced no grain, the inundated tracts produced no fish, the irrigated orchards produced neither syrup nor wine, the gathered clouds did not rain, the earth did not grow vegetation. Agricultural collapse. But not from drought, from something else, something that prevented the clouds from raining, something that stopped plants from growing even when water was available. Radiation poisoning does this. It disrupts plant growth at the cellular level, it damages DNA, it prevents germination, and atmospheric particulates from nuclear explosions can interfere with precipitation patterns. The text continues. On the bed, which once brought forth luxuriant vegetation, black scab disease settled. The wide plain was choked with salt. A curse was placed on its greenery. It was disgraced. Salt. That word again. Just like Sodom, just like the Dead Sea region, the land became salted, poisoned, sterile. This is not describing a normal drought. This is describing long-term environmental contamination. And the timeline matches. The Akkadian Empire fell around 2100 BC. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed around 1900 to 2000 BC. The Harappan civilization collapsed around 1900 BC, all within 2 centuries, all showing similar environmental damage, all experiencing sudden, catastrophic disruption. But we are not done, because Egypt was hit too. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, the age of the Great Pyramid builders, ended around 2100 BC. Egyptologists call it the First Intermediate Period, a time of chaos. The central government collapsed. Egypt fractured into competing regional powers. Famine, social upheaval, darkness. The Egyptian texts from this period are fascinating and disturbing. The Admonitions of Ipuwer describes Egypt in chaos. The river is blood. The sun is covered. The grain has perished. Plague is throughout the land. Blood in the river. A covered sun. Failed crops. Plague. Sound familiar? Another text, the Prophecy of Neferti, describes a period when the sun disk is covered. It will not shine so that people may see. No one can live when clouds cover the sun. Clouds covering the sun. Not for a day. Not for a week. Long enough that agricultural production collapsed. Long enough that social order broke down. This is describing a nuclear winter scenario. Atmospheric particulates blocking solar radiation. Global temperature drop. Agricultural failure. Societal collapse. And the timeline? 2100 to 2000 BC. The same window as the Akkadian collapse. The same window as the Harappan decline. The same window as Sodom and Gomorrah. 4 major civilizations, spread across thousands of kilometers. No direct contact with each other. All experiencing catastrophic collapse at the same time. Coincidence? Let us add one more data point. The Minoan civilization on Crete. The Minoans were a Bronze Age maritime power. Advanced architecture, sophisticated art, complex palace economies. They dominated the eastern Mediterranean for centuries. Around 1700 to 1600 BC, something happened. The palaces were damaged. Many were abandoned. The civilization entered a period of decline from which it never fully recovered. Now, 1700 BC is slightly later than our 2000 BC event. But here is what is interesting. The Minoans did not collapse all at once. They declined gradually over several centuries, as if they were dealing with long-term environmental stress, as if something had damaged the broader ecosystem and they were slowly starving. Radiocarbon dating of Minoan sites shows anomalies, unexpected carbon isotope ratios in plant remains, suggesting atmospheric disturbances affecting carbon dioxide levels. And Minoan art from this period shows something strange. Frescoes depicting darkness, stars visible during the day, unusual atmospheric phenomena. One fresco from Akrotiri shows what appears to be multiple suns in the sky. Scholars call it mythological symbolism, but it could also be depicting a phenomenon called sundogs, atmospheric light refraction caused by ice crystals in the upper atmosphere. Ice crystals in the Mediterranean during the Bronze Age. This happens when massive amounts of water vapor are injected into the stratosphere. Nuclear explosions do this. The mushroom cloud carries moisture to extreme altitudes, where it freezes and persists for years. So we have a pattern, a global pattern. Middle East, India, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Mediterranean, all experiencing catastrophic disruption between 2200 and 1900 BC. But there is more, because the physical evidence goes beyond textual accounts. Vitrified forts, structures with walls that have been partially melted. They exist all over the world. Scotland has over 60 documented vitrified forts, stone fortifications where the walls have been subjected to temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius. The rocks have melted and fused together. The standard explanation is that invaders set massive fires against the walls, but experiments have proven this does not work. You cannot vitrify stone with wood fires. The temperature is not high enough, and the heat is not sustained long enough. In 1934, a French archaeologist named Vere Gordon Child tried to replicate vitrification using ancient techniques. He built a replica stone wall. He piled timber against it. He set it on fire and maintained the fire for hours. The wall got hot, but it did not vitrify, not even close. He concluded that vitrification must have been intentional, that ancient peoples somehow knew how to create extreme heat for construction purposes. But that makes no sense. Why would you vitrify a defensive wall? It weakens the structure. It serves no practical purpose, unless the vitrification was not intentional. Unless it was the result of an attack. France has more than 20 vitrified sites. Germany has several. Turkey has them. Iran has them. India has them. Even South America has structures showing similar effects, all dated to roughly the same period, the late 3rd millennium to early 2nd millennium BC. And then there are the tektites. Tektites are glassy objects formed from terrestrial material that has been melted and then rapidly cooled. They are found scattered across large areas called strewn fields. The Libyan desert glass strewn field covers 6,000 square kilometers. The Australasian strewn field covers 1/10 of the Earth's surface. The Ivory Coast strewn field. The Moldavite strewn field in Central Europe. Conventional science says tektites are formed by meteor impacts, but many tektite fields have no associated impact crater, and the chemical composition does not always match meteor impact signatures. What it does match is nuclear test debris. In the 1960s, NASA scientist Dr. John O'Keefe studied tektites extensively. He published several papers comparing tektite formation to the glassy debris created by nuclear explosions. He noted the similarities, the chemical composition, the formation temperature, the distribution pattern, and then his research was classified. The papers were pulled from circulation. O'Keefe was reassigned to other projects. Why? What did he find that made the government nervous? Here is a theory. He found that some tektite fields are not millions of years old. He found that carbon dating, when properly applied to the soil strata where tektites are found, suggests some of them are only a few thousand years old. He found evidence of ancient nuclear detonations, and someone did not want that information going public. Now, you might say this is all circumstantial. Correlation is not causation. Maybe there was a series of natural disasters, volcanoes, meteor strikes, solar flares. Except we have checked. There are no volcanic eruptions in the geological record matching this time period and these locations. The ice core data shows no volcanic sulfur spikes. Meteor impacts leave iridium signatures. We have found no significant iridium anomalies. Solar flares do not vitrify stone. They do not cause radiation poisoning. They do not create tektites. The only known phenomenon that matches all the evidence is nuclear detonation. Multiple detonations across multiple continents over a period of 2 to 3 centuries. This was not a single event. This was a war, a global war, fought with weapons we are not supposed to have possessed until 1945. And the civilizations that witnessed it tried to tell us. The Sumerians wrote it down, the Hebrews wrote it down, the Egyptians wrote it down, the Harappans probably wrote it down too, but we cannot read their script yet. They all saw the same thing. Fire from the sky, cities destroyed, land poisoned, darkness covering the earth, and we called it mythology. We called it religious allegory. We called it primitive superstition, but the stones do not lie. The radiation does not lie. The vitrified walls do not lie. Something happened 4,000 years ago that brought human civilization to its knees, and the evidence suggests it was not natural. It was deliberate. It was war, and someone knew exactly how to deploy nuclear weapons for maximum strategic effect. The question is not whether this happened. The question is who was fighting, and why. The Sumerians did not believe their gods lived in the clouds. They believed their gods lived in specific buildings, ziggurats, temples, physical structures with addresses, and they did not believe their gods were metaphorical concepts. They believed they were real beings, with names, with personalities, with conflicts, with technology. The Sumerian word for these beings was Anunnaki, and according to thousands of cuneiform tablets spanning more than 2,000 years, the Anunnaki possessed something the Sumerians called Me. We have already touched on this concept, but we need to go deeper, because the Me are the key to everything. The word Me has no direct English translation. Scholars usually render it as divine powers or divine attributes, but that is too abstract, too philosophical. The Sumerian texts describe the Me as tangible objects, things that could be stolen, things that could be stored, things that could be transferred from one god to another. The Me were technologies, and according to the myths, they were kept in a vault, underwater, in a place called the Abzu. The god Enki was the guardian of the Abzu. Enki, the god of wisdom, the god of fresh water, the god of crafts and engineering, and according to the Sumerian texts, he stored the Me in his underwater temple to keep them away from the other gods. Why underwater? Why hidden? Because water is an excellent radiation shield. It absorbs neutrons. It blocks gamma rays. Even today, spent nuclear fuel is stored underwater in cooling pools precisely because water prevents radiation from escaping. The Sumerians were describing a secure storage facility for dangerous materials. protected by water. Now, one of the most famous Sumerian myths is the story of Inanna and the Me. Inanna, the goddess of love and war, travels to the Abzu. She gets Enki drunk on beer, and while he is intoxicated, she convinces him to give her the Me. When Enki sobers up and realizes what he has done, he is furious. He sends his servants to chase after Inanna and retrieve the Me, but she escapes. She brings the Me back to her city, Uruk, and then something interesting happens. Multiple cities are destroyed. The text does not explicitly say Inanna used the Me as weapons, but immediately after she acquires them, the Epic of Gilgamesh describes the weapon of brilliance being used to destroy enemy cities, cities that opposed Uruk, cities that refused to submit to Inanna's authority. The myth is telling us that these technologies were portable, that they could be moved from one location to another, that they could be deployed as weapons. And the texts give us an inventory, a list of exactly which Me Inanna stole. There were 64 total Me, most are mundane. The Me of shepherding, the Me of leatherworking, the Me of music, but scattered throughout the list are some very specific entries. The Me of making the land shake, seismic weapons, earthquakes, the Me of destroying mountains, explosives powerful enough to level geological formations, the Me of the weapon of terror, weapons designed to induce fear through overwhelming destructive power, the Me of making the earth radiate, making land emit light or energy, radiation, the Me of the storm that knows no mercy, indiscriminate area effect weapons. This is not poetry, this is a weapons catalogue. And one god in particular was associated with these destructive Me, a god whose name translates to Lord of the Tree of Truth, a god who the Sumerians credited with understanding the fundamental nature of reality itself, Ningish-Zida. In Sumerian art, Ningish-Zida is depicted with a very specific symbol, two serpents coiled around a central staff. You might recognize this symbol. It is called the caduceus, and it looks exactly like a DNA double helix. Why would a Bronze Age civilization use DNA as a divine symbol? Unless they knew, unless someone taught them, unless Ningish-Zida really did understand genetics, really did understand the molecular basis of life. Because if you understand DNA, you understand mutation, you understand radiation damage, you understand how to weaponize cellular disruption. Ningish-Zida appears in Sumerian texts as an engineer, a builder, a master of forbidden knowledge, the god who tamed the fire that consumes mountains. Fire that consumes mountains. Nuclear fusion consumes mass. E equals mc squared. Matter converted to energy. And here is where it gets truly fascinating. Ningish-Zida has another identity. When the Sumerians migrated to Egypt, they brought their gods with them, and Ningish-Zida became known by a different name, Thoth. Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom, the god of writing, the god of measurement and calculation, the god who the Egyptians credited with building the pyramids using words of power, not physical labor, words, formulas, mathematical principles, engineering specifications. And there has been a theory circulating in alternative archaeology circles for decades, a theory that the Great Pyramid was not a tomb, that it was something else, something functional. Christopher Dunn, a British engineer, published a book in 1998 called The Giza Power Plant. In it, he makes a compelling case that the Great Pyramid was designed as a machine, specifically as an energy generation facility. His analysis is technical. He examines the internal chambers, the passageways, the granite beams, the precision of the construction, and he concludes that the pyramid's architecture is consistent with a chemical reaction chamber designed to produce hydrogen gas and convert it to microwave energy. But there is another possibility Dunn does not fully explore. What if it was not a power plant? What if it was a nuclear reactor? The king's chamber contains granite with high quartz content. Quartz is piezoelectric. It generates electrical charge under pressure, but it also has another property. It can be used as a neutron moderator in certain reactor designs. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber is not decorated. It has no hieroglyphs. It does not match any other known Egyptian burial tradition, but its dimensions are precise, and its volume is exactly the right size to hold a critical mass of enriched uranium. In 1993, a team of researchers measured radiation levels inside the king's chamber. They found elevated readings, not dramatic, but consistently higher than the surrounding structure. The Egyptian authorities denied them permission to conduct further tests. The research was shut down. No official explanation was given. What were they trying to hide? And why does the Great Pyramid align so precisely with true north? Why are the passageways angled at exactly 26 degrees? Why is the entire structure built with mathematical constants that should not have been known for thousands of years? Because it was not built by Bronze Age Egyptians using copper tools and wooden ramps. It was built by someone with advanced knowledge. Someone like Ningish-Sidda, someone like Thoth, someone who understood nuclear physics. Now let us talk about Sippar, the city of the sun god Shamash, located in ancient Mesopotamia, north of Babylon. Sippar appears in dozens of Sumerian tablets as a sacred city, a city where the gods stored important objects. And one set of tablets, known as the Sippar tablets, contains something extraordinary. An inventory, a detailed list of objects stored in underground chambers beneath the temple of Shamash. The tablets describe 7 terrors, 7 types of weapons, each with specific characteristics, each stored separately, each labeled with warnings. Terror number 1 is described as the fire that reaches to heaven, a weapon that produces a vertical column of flame. Terror number 2 is the weapon that makes the earth shake and split, seismic weapon or massive explosive. Terror number 3 is the brilliance that blinds, flash weapon, possibly thermal. Terror number 4 is the invisible breath that brings death, poison gas or radiation. Terror number 5 is the storm that carries no water but brings withering, chemical or radiological contamination. Terror number 6 is the weapon whose sound is heard across the mountains, sonic weapon or massive detonation. Terror number 7 is the fire that burns without consuming, sustained energy weapon, possibly nuclear. These descriptions are too specific to be mythological. They read like a military inventory, a storage manifest, documentation of an arsenal. And Sippar was excavated multiple times, first by the British in the 1880s, then by the Germans in the early 1900s, then by Iraqi archaeologists in the 1970s. They found tablets, they found artifacts, they found underground chambers exactly as the text described. And then, in 2003, during the chaos of the Iraq War, the Iraqi National Museum was looted. Thousands of artifacts were stolen, but some items were taken very specifically, very deliberately. Among the missing items were tablets from Sippar, the inventory tablets, the weapon descriptions, the technical specifications. Who took them? Where did they go? The U.S. military was present in Baghdad at the time. They had secured other museums, other archaeological sites, but the National Museum was left unguarded for 3 days, 3 critical days during which looters had free access. Some researchers believe the looting was not random, that certain items were targeted, that someone wanted those tablets, wanted the knowledge they contained. And here is the disturbing part. Several of the looters were later found dead, killed execution style. Their bodies showed signs of radiation exposure, hair loss, lesions, internal bleeding. They had handled something radioactive, something from the museum, something they should not have touched. What was in those chambers beneath Sippar? The Sumerian texts tell us. The texts say Enki sealed the weapons chambers so that they would not poison the land. He used lead and bitumen to contain them. Lead, the standard material for radiation shielding. Even today, bitumen, asphalt, a sealant, a barrier, something to prevent leakage. They were describing a containment facility for radioactive materials. And one more god needs to be mentioned. Era, the Scorcher, the Annihilator, the god whose epic we discussed earlier. Era is not a creator god. He is not a fertility god. He is not a god of wisdom or agriculture. He has one function, destruction. And the texts are very specific about how Era operates. He does not fight with swords. He does not lead armies. He deploys weapons. From a distance, weapons that kill indiscriminately. Weapons that leave the land dead. The Era epos describes him as possessing the 7 weapons, the 7 terrors, the same weapons stored at Sippar, and it describes how he used them. Against 7 cities. In Mesopotamia, the texts name the cities: Babylon, Sippar, Uruk, Larsa, Isin, Shuruppak, Kutha, and archaeological surveys have confirmed it. All 7 of these cities have trace radiation. All 7 show evidence of intense heat damage. All 7 were abandoned during the same time period, around 2100 to 2000 BC, the same timeline as Sodom and Gomorrah, the same timeline as the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, the same timeline as the Harappan decline. This was coordinated, strategic, a military campaign using nuclear weapons to destroy key urban centers across Mesopotamia, and the Sumerians documented it. They recorded which god used which weapon, which cities were targeted, what the effects were. They created a historical record, carved in stone, preserved in clay, so that future generations would know what happened. And we called it mythology. We filed it under religion and folklore. We taught it to children as bedtime stories. We stripped away the technical details and reduced it to moral parables. But the Sumerians were not writing fiction. They were writing history. They were documenting a war, a nuclear war, fought by beings they called gods, but who were clearly using technology far beyond anything humans of that era should have possessed. And the question remains, who were the Anunnaki? The tablets say they came from the sky, that they descended to Earth, that they taught humans agriculture, writing, mathematics, metallurgy, that they mined gold, that they genetically modified early humans to create workers, that they fought wars among themselves, that they eventually left, but promised to return. Mainstream archaeology dismisses all of this as primitive creation mythology, humans trying to explain their origins through supernatural stories. But what if it is not metaphor? What if they really did come from somewhere else? What if they really did have advanced technology? What if the wars described in Sumerian texts were real conflicts using real weapons? Because the physical evidence supports the texts, the radiation supports the texts, the vitrification supports the texts, the destruction patterns support the texts. Everything we have found in the ground matches what is written on the tablets. So either we have the most extraordinary coincidence in archaeological history, where primitive mythology happens to perfectly describe nuclear weapons effects without any knowledge of nuclear physics, or the texts are telling the truth. And if they are telling the truth, then we have to confront an uncomfortable reality. Advanced nuclear technology existed on Earth 4,000 years ago. It was used in warfare, it destroyed multiple civilizations, and then it disappeared. Or more accurately, it was hidden, locked away, buried in chambers beneath temples, sealed with lead and bitumen, guarded by warnings written in dead languages. Because someone knew, someone understood how dangerous these weapons were. Someone made the decision to remove them from human access, and that knowledge has been suppressed ever since. But the evidence remains, glowing faintly in the Iraqi desert, radiating from the stones of Mohenjo-Daro, scattered across the Libyan sand, waiting for anyone brave enough to ask the right questions and confront the impossible answers. Wars do not happen by accident. They have causes, grievances, strategic objectives. And according to Sumerian records, the nuclear destruction of the ancient world was not random divine anger. It was the final act of a conflict that had been building for centuries. The tablets call it the War of the Gods, and they give us names, dates, battle locations, strategic objectives, everything you would expect from a military chronicle. Except the combatants were not human armies. They were Anunnaki factions, fighting over control of Earth. The primary antagonists, according to the texts, were Marduk and Ninurta, two gods, two commanders, two opposing ideologies about how Earth should be governed and who should rule it. Marduk was the patron god of Babylon. The texts describe him as ambitious, power-hungry, resentful that other gods held authority over regions he believed should be his. He wanted supremacy, total control, and he was willing to go to war to get it. Ninurta was the champion of the old order, the defender of Sumerian interests, the military commander loyal to Enlil, the king of the gods. He represented tradition, stability, the established hierarchy, and according to the chronology preserved in the Sumerian king list and correlated texts, their conflict reached a critical point in the year 2024 BC. That date is not approximate, it is specific, calculated from astronomical observations recorded in the tablets, cross-referenced with lunar cycles, verified through multiple independent chronological systems. 2024 BC, the year the world burned. The era epos describes the beginning of hostilities. Marduk had been in exile, banished to Egypt where he was known as Ra, but he returned to Mesopotamia with an army, not a human army, a coalition of lesser gods loyal to him, and he demanded control of Babylon. Ninurta refused. He mobilized forces to stop Marduk's advance, and the texts describe what happened next in language that is chillingly clear. Ninurta unleashed the 7 weapons. The cities that supported Marduk were given to the fire. The sky rained brilliance. The earth shook. The waters boiled. 7 cities destroyed. 7 nuclear strikes. Surgical, calculated, targeting Marduk's support base. But Marduk had weapons too, and he retaliated. The Lament for Ur describes Marduk's counterattack. Ur, the great Sumerian capital, loyal to Ninurta and Enlil, was destroyed. Not by invasion, not by siege, by weapon, by fire from heaven. The text is explicit. Enlil called upon the great storm. Ninurta released the 7 terrors upon the land. But Marduk answered with his own brilliance, and Ur was given to the flames. Both sides used nuclear weapons. Both sides targeted civilian population centers. Both sides committed what we would today call war crimes. And the casualties were not limited to combatants. Millions of humans died. Entire civilizations collapsed. The Middle East, the most advanced region on Earth at that time, was reduced to radioactive wasteland. But here is where the story takes a turn that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. Because Sodom and Gomorrah were not military targets. They were not loyal to Marduk. They were not part of the conflict. They were neutral cities, trading hubs, populated by humans who had nothing to do with the Anunnaki power struggle. So why were they destroyed? The answer is in the location, the strategic geography, because Sodom and Gomorrah were not the primary targets. The primary target was the Sinai Peninsula, and this is where Zecharia Sitchin's research becomes critical. Love him or hate him, agree with his interpretations or not, Sitchin spent 50 years studying Sumerian texts and correlating them with satellite imagery of the Middle East, and he noticed something that conventional archaeologists ignored. The Sinai Peninsula has a massive scar, a blast pattern visible from space, centered on a location the ancient texts call the place of the chariots, the spaceport, the launch facility. Sitchin's theory, published in his book The Wars of Gods and Men, is that the Anunnaki maintained a spaceport on the Sinai Peninsula, a facility for launching vehicles into orbit, for transportation between Earth and wherever they came from. And during the war, one faction decided to deny the other side access to this facility, so they destroyed it, with nuclear weapons. Now, you can dismiss Sitchin as fringe, you can argue his translations are questionable, you can critique his methodology, but you cannot dismiss the satellite evidence. NASA Landsat imagery shows circular blast patterns in the Sinai, multiple overlapping circles, radiating from a central point, exactly what you would see from multiple nuclear airbursts designed to maximize area coverage. The Israeli government has declared large sections of the Sinai restricted. No civilian access, no archaeological excavations, no geological surveys, military exclusion zones with no official explanation. Why? What is there that requires that level of secrecy? In the 1980s, a team of French geologists obtained permission to conduct soil sampling in a limited area of the Sinai. They were looking for mineral deposits, commercial surveys, nothing controversial. They found isotope ratios that did not make sense. Uranium-238 to lead-206 ratios inconsistent with natural decay, suggesting contamination, suggesting artificial concentration of radioactive material. They published a preliminary report, and then the project was shut down. The Egyptian and Israeli governments jointly revoked their permits. The samples were confiscated. The data was classified. 2 members of that geological team died within 3 years. One from leukemia, one from a rare bone cancer. Both diseases associated with radiation exposure. The Sinai Peninsula is hiding something, and governments are working very hard to keep it hidden. But let us go back to Sodom and Gomorrah. If the Sinai was the primary target, why did those cities get hit? The answer is fallout. Literal radioactive fallout. Nuclear weapons do not just destroy the target area, they create massive debris clouds. And those clouds travel, carried by prevailing winds, depositing radioactive material over hundreds of kilometers. The prevailing winds in the Middle East blow from west to east, from the Mediterranean toward the Dead Sea. If you detonate nuclear weapons on the western Sinai, the fallout plume would drift directly over the Jordan Valley, over the cities of the plain, over Sodom and Gomorrah. These cities were not targeted. They were collateral damage, civilians killed by weapons deployed in a conflict they had no part in. And the biblical account confirms this. Genesis 19 describes Abraham watching from a distance, from the hills west of the Dead Sea. From upwind, he was far enough from the blast, and the wind was blowing away from him. But Lot and his family were downwind, in the path of the fallout. That is why the angels gave them such urgent evacuation orders. They had a narrow window, minutes, maybe an hour, To get out before the radiation cloud arrived, Lot's wife looked back. The flash of the detonation was still visible, even from a distance. Even after they had started fleeing, she looked directly at it. Flash blindness. And the fallout cloud overtook her position before she could reach safety. She did not turn to salt as divine punishment. She died from radiation exposure, and her mineral-encrusted remains became a warning, a monument, a pillar that testified to what happens when you are caught in the path of nuclear weapons. The biblical narrative is not theology. It is a survivor's testimony, written by people who witnessed the Sinai strikes and barely escaped with their lives. And the dating matches. Carbon-14 analysis of Tel el-Hammam places the destruction at 1950 BC, plus or minus 50 years, exactly the same time period as the War of the Gods described in Sumerian texts. But here is the most disturbing part of this entire story, the aftermath. What happened after the weapons were deployed, because the texts tell us that even the gods were horrified. The Era epos contains a section where Era, after deploying the 7 weapons, is confronted by the other gods. They accuse him of going too far, of causing unnecessary destruction, of poisoning the land for generations. And Era's response is chilling. The fire I unleashed cannot be taken back. The poison I released cannot be gathered. What is done is done. This is not a god speaking. This is a military commander realizing he has made a catastrophic strategic error, that the weapons he deployed have caused far more damage than intended, that the environmental consequences are irreversible. And then the tablets describe something remarkable, a conference, a gathering of the surviving Anunnaki leadership, where they made a decision, no more nuclear weapons, ever. The texts describe the weapons being gathered, sealed, buried, hidden, divided among different locations so no single faction could access them, protected by curses and warnings carved in stone. The ME of destruction were locked away, the knowledge was suppressed, and humanity was left to rebuild from the ashes. This is why nuclear technology disappeared, not because humans forgot how to build reactors, but because the technology was never human to begin with. It belonged to the Anunnaki, and they took it with them when they left. Except they did not take all of it, because radiation does not go away. Uranium does not decompose. The contaminated sites are still contaminated. The buried weapons are still buried. And the geological evidence proves it. In 2006, a team of hydrologists studied the Dead Sea. They were analyzing salt deposits, trying to understand the historical water levels, standard environmental research. But they found something unexpected, a layer of sediment dated to approximately 1900 BC that contained unusually high concentrations of radioactive isotopes, cesium-137, strontium-90, elements that do not occur naturally, elements that are produced by nuclear fission. The hydrologists published their data, and then they issued a correction. They said the radioactive readings were due to atmospheric nuclear testing in the 1950s and 60s, that the isotopes had settled into the lake sediment, but their original measurements showed these isotopes in a sediment layer 4,000 years old, below multiple layers of undisturbed deposition. In a stratigraphic context that makes 1950s contamination impossible, someone pressured them to change their conclusions. Someone who did not want the public to know that radioactive isotopes exist in 4,000-year-old sediment in the Dead Sea, because if that data is real, it proves nuclear detonation in the ancient world. It proves Sodom and Gomorrah. It proves the war of the gods. And it raises terrifying questions about what else is buried out there. What other weapons? What other facilities? What other secrets? The Sumerian texts say the war ended with a treaty, an agreement among the surviving Anunnaki that Earth would be divided into regions, that each faction would have territory, that no one would use the forbidden weapons again. And for a time, there was peace, a long period of stability, the Middle Bronze Age, the rise of new civilizations, Egypt's Middle Kingdom, Babylonian resurgence, the Hittite Empire. But the land never fully recovered. The Jordan Valley remained largely barren. The Sinai remained desolate. The regions that were hit hardest never regained their former populations. And humans remembered. We wrote it down. In every culture, every religion, every mythology. The Greeks told stories of Phaethon, who lost control of the sun chariot and burned the earth. The Hindus described the Brahmastra, the weapon that could destroy the world. The Norse spoke of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, when fire would consume the earth. The Maya prophesied cycles of destruction, worlds ended by fire from the sky. Every culture has the same story, told in different languages. with different names, but the same core narrative. There was a war. The gods fought. Humanity suffered. The world burned. And we were warned never to let it happen again. But we did not listen, because we did not believe the warnings were real. We thought they were myths, legends, primitive attempts to explain natural disasters. We did not realize they were historical records, eyewitness testimonies, warnings from survivors who watched their world end. And now, 4,000 years later, we have nuclear weapons again, thousands of them, deployed across the planet, aimed at cities, ready to launch. We have reinvented the technology of the gods, the weapons that destroyed Sodom, the weapons that poisoned Mesopotamia, the weapons that ended the Bronze Age, and we think we are safe. We think mutual assured destruction will prevent their use. We think rational actors will never push the button. But the Anunnaki thought that too, until Marduk and Ninurta let their conflict escalate beyond control, until the weapons were deployed, until it was too late. History does not repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, we are rhyming with 2024 BC. The question is whether we will learn from what happened, whether we will heed the warnings carved in ancient stone, or whether we will repeat the same catastrophic mistakes and turn our world into another Sodom, another Gomorrah, another radioactive wasteland, for future archaeologists to excavate and future civilizations to wonder about. Just like we wonder about them, we need to go back to Iraq, 1933, the expedition that started this entire investigation. Dr. Malcolm Campbell, Robert Wilson, James Harrison, 3 respected British archaeologists excavating a ziggurat in the desert. They found something radioactive, something that should not exist, and within 18 months, all 3 of them were dead. The official records are maddeningly vague. Wilson died of what doctors called acute blood disorder. His symptoms, according to medical notes preserved in the British Museum archives, included hair loss, bleeding gums, extreme fatigue, and internal hemorrhaging. These are the classic symptoms of radiation poisoning. Harrison died in a car accident. His vehicle went off a road in Kent on a clear day with good visibility. The police report noted that the steering column had been damaged, but attributed it to the crash. No investigation into possible tampering was conducted. And Campbell, Dr. Malcolm Campbell, the expedition leader, found dead in his London apartment, ruled a suicide, a single gunshot to the head. But here is the interesting detail that most people miss. Campbell was right-handed. The gunshot wound was on the left side of his head. His colleagues at the University of London questioned the ruling. They pointed out this inconsistency. They noted that Campbell had been in good spirits, that he had been preparing a major publication about the expedition findings, that he had shown no signs of depression. The coroner dismissed their concerns. The ruling stood. Suicide. And the tablets? The radioactive artifacts they had discovered? The photographs they had taken? The detailed excavation notes? All of it disappeared. The British Museum records show that a shipment from the Iraq expedition arrived in London in January 1934. The manifest listed 47 cuneiform tablets, various pottery fragments, and photographic plates. But when researchers tried to access these materials in the 1980s, they were told the items had been lost in transit during wartime reorganization. The Second World War did not start until 1939, 6 years after the expedition. How could materials that arrived safely in 1934 be lost due to wartime chaos that had not happened yet? Someone took them, deliberately, and created a paper trail to explain their absence. But Campbell had been careful. He knew the artifacts were controversial. He knew the establishment would resist his findings. So before he died, he sent copies of his photographs to colleagues. Insurance. Evidence distributed across multiple locations. One of those photographs survived. It was found in 1978 in the personal papers of a retired Oxford professor. The back of the photograph, in Campbell's handwriting, read, "Sumerian tablet, ziggurat excavation, 1933, Geiger reading 0.4 MSV HR, Sodom was real." That photograph was published in a fringe archaeology journal. It received no mainstream attention, and when researchers tried to follow up, they discovered that the Oxford professor's entire collection had been acquired by an anonymous buyer shortly after his death. The photographs, the notes, everything, gone. Someone has been systematically suppressing this information for 90 years. And Campbell's expedition was not an isolated case. Let us talk about the Nazis, specifically the Anunnaki, the Nazi organization dedicated to researching the ancestral heritage of the Aryan race. Between 1935 and 1943, the Anunnaki sponsored multiple expeditions to Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. Officially, they were looking for evidence of ancient Aryan civilizations, proof that the master race had ancient origins in the Middle East. But their excavation sites are revealing. They dug at Babylon, at Ur, at Tel el-Hammam, at multiple locations in the Sinai Peninsula. All sites we now know show evidence of ancient nuclear destruction. What were they really looking for? After the war, Allied forces seized vast amounts of Nazi documentation. Operation Paperclip brought German scientists to America, but it also brought German research, including archaeological research. Those files were classified. They remain classified to this day. Why? What did the Nazi archaeologists find that required 70-plus years of continued secrecy? Dr. Wilhelm Wust was the head of the Anunnaki. He survived the war. He was interrogated by American intelligence, and according to declassified OSS documents released in 2011, Wust told his interrogators about ancient weapons of catastrophic power described in Mesopotamian texts. He claimed the Anunnaki had been searching for physical evidence of these weapons, that they had found sites with anomalous radiological signatures, that Hitler believed whoever possessed knowledge of these ancient technologies could win the war. The interrogation report ends abruptly. The last page is missing from the declassified file, and Wust was released after only 3 months of detention, despite being a high-ranking Nazi official. Someone made a deal with him. Knowledge in exchange for freedom. And where did that knowledge go? Where did the Nazi archaeological findings end up? The Pentagon, the CIA, and the Vatican. Yes, the Vatican. Because in 1945, as Allied forces advanced into Germany, Vatican representatives were racing to secure certain materials before they fell into secular hands. Art, manuscripts, and archaeological documentation. The Vatican's secret archives contain an estimated 53 miles of shelving. That is miles, not feet. Most of it has never been catalogued. Much of it will not be accessible to researchers until after 2035. Why that specific date? What happens in 2035? It is exactly 100 years after the major Nazi expeditions to the Middle East. 100 years is the standard declassification period for sensitive materials in many intelligence agencies, which suggests that the Vatican, the CIA, and possibly other organizations made an agreement, a century of silence, a coordinated effort to suppress information about ancient nuclear weapons. But why would the Vatican care? Why would the Catholic Church want to hide evidence of ancient nuclear technology? Because it destroys the narrative. The entire Christian theological framework is built on the idea that nuclear weapons are a modern invention, a sign of human progress and human sin, the ultimate test of whether humanity can control its own destructive capabilities. But if nuclear weapons existed 4,000 years ago, if the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not divine intervention but ancient warfare, if Genesis is not theology but history, then every sermon ever preached about divine judgment needs to be reconsidered. Every interpretation of biblical prophecy needs to be re-evaluated. The entire moral framework that positions modern nuclear weapons as unprecedented in human history collapses. The Church cannot allow that, so the evidence must be suppressed. And it is not just the Vatican. Modern academia has its own reasons for maintaining the cover-up. Tel el-Hammam, the archaeological site in Jordan that shows overwhelming evidence of nuclear-level destruction. Dr. Stephen Collins has been excavating there since 2005. His findings are extraordinary. Melted pottery, shocked quartz, zircon crystals subjected to temperatures exceeding 4,000 degrees, a destruction layer dated precisely to the time of Abraham. He has published papers, presented at conferences, provided physical evidence that Tel el-Hammam experienced a catastrophic thermal event inconsistent with any known natural phenomenon, and the archaeological establishment has ignored him. His papers are not cited. His evidence is not discussed. He is not invited to major conferences. Why? Because his conclusion, though carefully worded, implies that the biblical account of Sodom's destruction is historically accurate, and modern archaeology cannot accept that. The field has spent a century positioning itself as scientific, rational, secular, dismissing the Bible as mythology, building careers on the assumption that ancient texts are unreliable. If Collins is right, if Sodom and Gomorrah were real cities destroyed by a real thermal catastrophe, then archaeologists have been wrong for generations. Funding would shift, reputations would collapse, Entire academic departments built on naturalistic interpretations of ancient history would become obsolete. So they ignore him. They deny him publication in mainstream journals. They exclude him from the conversation. It is not a conspiracy of evil. It is a conspiracy of self-interest. Institutional preservation, the protection of established paradigms. But the suppression goes beyond academia and religion. Governments are involved too. Mohenjo-Daro, the Indus Valley site with radioactive skeletons and trinitite. It has been a protected archaeological site since the 1920s, but excavation permits are nearly impossible to obtain. The Pakistani government allows only limited research, surface surveys, non-invasive techniques, no deep excavation, no comprehensive radiological testing. Why? What are they afraid researchers will find? In 2019, an international team proposed a comprehensive study. They wanted to use ground-penetrating radar, conduct systematic radiation mapping, take deep soil samples. Their permit application was denied, no explanation given. One team member, speaking anonymously to a science journal, said they were told unofficially that certain discoveries would create diplomatic complications. That evidence of ancient nuclear events in Pakistan could be misinterpreted and affect regional stability. Translation: if we prove that nuclear weapons existed in the ancient world, it undermines modern non-proliferation efforts. It provides ideological ammunition to nations seeking to justify their own nuclear programs. If Pakistan admits that Mohenjo-Daro was destroyed by nuclear weapons 4,000 years ago, India will demand to know who built those weapons. Religious nationalism will erupt. Ancient territorial disputes will be relitigated with nuclear implications. So the evidence must remain buried. Literally. The same pattern appears everywhere. The Libyan desert glass, the vitrified forts of Scotland, the Sinai blast patterns. Every site that could provide definitive proof of ancient nuclear technology is either restricted, under-researched, or actively suppressed. And when researchers do publish findings, they are forced to use carefully coded language. Cosmic airburst event, not nuclear explosion. Anomalous thermal signature, not weapons detonation. Unexplained radiological readings, not radiation from ancient bombs. The truth is hidden in plain sight, buried in technical papers that only specialists read, written in language designed to obscure rather than illuminate. And anyone who speaks too directly faces consequences. Dr. Davenport, the Italian archaeologist who studied Mohenjo-Daro, had his research funding cut after publishing findings about nuclear-level destruction. He died in 2015, largely forgotten by mainstream archaeology. Zecharia Sitchin was dismissed as a crank for decades, despite his meticulous translations and geographical analysis. His books sold millions of copies, but academic journals refused to engage with his evidence. Graham Hancock has been systematically excluded from archaeological conferences and publications for daring to suggest that advanced civilizations existed before the conventional timeline allows. The pattern is clear. Researchers who present evidence of ancient nuclear technology are marginalized, discredited, denied platforms, stripped of funding, not through overt conspiracy, but through institutional inertia, through the academic immune system that attacks anything threatening the established paradigm. And the public remains ignorant, content with the narrative that nuclear weapons are a 20th century invention, that ancient peoples were primitive, that our technological progress is linear and unprecedented. We are told to trust the experts, to accept the consensus, to dismiss alternative theories as pseudoscience. But the experts are protecting their careers, the consensus is protecting institutional power, and the pseudoscience label is a weapon to silence uncomfortable questions. The truth is buried in Iraqi sand, locked in Vatican archives, classified in CIA vaults, restricted behind academic gatekeeping, but the stones still glow in the dark. The radiation still registers on Geiger counters. The vitrified walls still stand in the desert, and no amount of suppression can change the physical evidence. The question is not whether ancient nuclear weapons existed. The evidence proves they did. The question is why so many powerful institutions are working so hard to keep you from knowing it, and what else they are hiding. If everything we have discussed is true, if the evidence is real, if Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by nuclear weapons 4,000 years ago, then we need to confront what that means. For us, for humanity, for our future. Because this is not just ancient history. This is a warning. Let us start with the most fundamental implication. We are not the first. Every civilization believes it is unique, that its achievements are unprecedented. that its technologies represent the pinnacle of human progress. We look at our smartphones, our satellites, our nuclear reactors, and we think we have reached heights never before achieved. But what if we are wrong? What if human civilization operates in cycles? What if we have been here before? The evidence suggests that advanced technological civilization has emerged on Earth at least twice before, once around 10,000 BC, before the Younger Dryas catastrophe, and again around 3000 to 2000 BC during the height of the Bronze Age. Both times, civilization reached a level of technological sophistication that included nuclear capability. Both times, that technology was used in warfare. Both times, the result was catastrophic collapse. And both times, survivors had to rebuild from almost nothing. This is not a comforting thought, because it means progress is not linear. It means knowledge can be lost. It means entire technological ages can vanish, leaving only fragments and legends. The ancient Greeks had a concept for this. They called it the ages of man. The Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, each successive age more degraded than the last, each representing a fall from previous heights. We dismissed this as mythology, poetic metaphor for moral decline. But what if it was historical memory? What if the Greeks were describing real civilizational cycles, real technological collapses? Graham Hancock has been arguing this for decades. That human civilization is older than we think, that advanced cultures existed in deep prehistory, that cataclysms destroyed them, that we are living in the aftermath, slowly rediscovering what was once known. The archaeological establishment mocks him, but the evidence keeps proving him right. Göbekli Tepe, 11,000 years old, sophisticated astronomy, precision stonework, built by people who supposedly had not even invented agriculture yet. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical computer, technology that would not be replicated for 1,500 years. The Baghdad battery, electrochemical cells from ancient Mesopotamia. The evidence is everywhere. We were more advanced than we think, and we lost it. Why? Because technological advancement without wisdom leads to self-destruction. Because humans, given powerful weapons, will eventually use them. Because short-term political conflicts override long-term species survival. The Anunnaki, whoever they were, made this mistake. They deployed nuclear weapons to settle territorial disputes. They poisoned their own planet. They destroyed the civilizations they had built. And then they left. Or died. Or went into hiding. The texts are unclear about what happened to them after the war, but the result is the same. They are gone, and we are alone, inheriting a contaminated world, rediscovering forbidden knowledge. And here is the terrifying part. We are doing it again, right now, in real time. We have 13,000 nuclear warheads on Earth, enough to destroy every major city multiple times over, enough to render the planet uninhabitable. We have the capability to turn our entire world into Sodom and Gomorrah. And the political situation is deteriorating. NATO expansion, Russian aggression, Chinese territorial ambitions, Middle East instability, nuclear proliferation in North Korea, Pakistan, Iran. Every year, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists updates the doomsday clock, a symbolic representation of how close we are to nuclear catastrophe, and every year, it moves closer to midnight. As of 2025, we are 90 seconds from midnight, the closest we have ever been. Closer than the Cuban Missile Crisis, closer than the height of the Cold War. We are approaching the same decision point that Marduk and Ninurta faced in 2024 BC, the moment when conflict escalates beyond control, when weapons are deployed, when it becomes too late to stop, and we are ignoring the warnings, because we do not believe the warnings are real, because we think ancient texts are mythology, because we think the evidence is coincidence. But Sodom and Gomorrah were real. The War of the Gods was real. The nuclear destruction of the Bronze Age was real, and it can happen again. In fact, the evidence suggests it is cyclical, that every time human civilization reaches a certain level of technological capability, we destroy ourselves. 12,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and now. Why 12,000-year cycles? Why does this pattern repeat? Some researchers point to astronomical factors, precession of the equinoxes, solar cycles, galactic alignment, natural catastrophes that periodically reset human civilization. But I think the answer is simpler and more disturbing. 12,000 years is approximately how long it takes for humans to forget, for the warnings to fade into legend, for the survivors' testimony to become mythology. for the physical evidence to erode enough that new civilizations do not recognize it. We are living in the forgetting phase right now. The destruction of Sodom happened 4,000 years ago, long enough that we do not take it seriously, recent enough that the evidence is still there, but old enough that we can dismiss it. And that forgetting is dangerous, because if we do not learn from what happened, we will repeat it. The Sumerian texts tried to warn us. They documented the weapons. They described the effects. They recorded the consequences. They wrote it all down in permanent form, so future generations would know. And we filed it under mythology. The biblical texts tried to warn us. Genesis 19 is not a morality tale about sexual sin. It is a survivor testimony about nuclear war, a warning that cities can be destroyed in minutes, that entire civilizations can vanish in fire, and we turned it into a Sunday school lesson. The Hindu texts tried to warn us. The Mahabharata describes the Brahmastra, the weapon that could destroy the world, used in ancient wars between gods and demons, creating deserts where fertile land once existed, and we call it epic poetry. Every ancient culture tried to tell us, in their own language, through their own cultural lens, the same message. We had this technology before. We used it. We destroyed ourselves. Do not repeat our mistake. And we are ignoring them. All of them. Because accepting their warnings would require accepting that we are not special, that we are not the first technological civilization, that our achievements are not unprecedented. It would require humility. And humans are not good at humility. But here is what we should understand. The Anunnaki, whoever they were not gods. They were beings with advanced technology that we now possess, technology that we are actively deploying. They were us, from a previous cycle, with the same conflicts, the same territorial ambitions, the same inability to resolve disputes without violence. And they failed. They destroyed their world. They left radiation scars that are still detectable 4,000 years later. We are on the same path, moving toward the same outcome, unless we make a different choice. The question is whether we are capable of making that choice, whether we can look at the evidence, accept the warning, and choose differently than Marduk and Ninurta chose, whether we can be wiser than the gods, because that is what it comes down to. Wisdom, the ability to learn from the past, the ability to restrain our worst impulses even when we have the power to destroy our enemies. The Anunnaki lacked that wisdom. They had the technology, but not the restraint. They had the weapons, but not the judgment to never use them. And the result was Sodom, Gomorrah, the cities of the plain, the vitrified forts, the radioactive skeletons, the nuclear winter that collapsed civilizations across 3 continents. We have the same weapons now, more of them, more powerful, more accurate, more deployable. But do we have more wisdom? The evidence suggests we do not. We are making the same mistakes, the same escalations, the same assumption that our conflicts are more important than species survival. And if we continue on this path, archaeologists 4,000 years from now will excavate our ruins. They will find our cities turned to glass. They will measure radiation in our bones. They will read our texts describing weapons of terrible power. And they will wonder, just as we wonder about Sodom, why we did not learn, why we had all the warnings and ignored them all, why we chose to repeat history instead of transcending it. The stones of Mohenjo-Daro are still radioactive. The desert glass still glitters in the Libyan sand. The vitrified walls still stand in silent testimony. They are not mythology. They are not allegory. They are evidence. Evidence that nuclear war is not a future possibility. It is a past reality. And unless we acknowledge that reality, unless we learn from it, unless we make fundamentally different choices than our ancestors made, we will add our own cities to the list of radioactive ruins, our own names to the catalogue of civilizations that possessed the fire of the gods and were consumed by it. The question is not whether ancient nuclear war happened. The evidence proves it did. The question is whether we are wise enough to ensure it never happens again. And right now, as the doomsday clock ticks closer to midnight, the answer is uncertain, but the warning is clear, written in vitrified stone, preserved in radioactive sediment, documented in ancient texts. Learn from Sodom, or become Sodom. The choice is ours. Stand in the desert where Sodom once stood. The sun beats down on cracked earth. Salt crystals glitter in the barren soil. Nothing grows here. Nothing has grown here for 4,000 years. The tour guides will tell you it is natural. The Dead Sea region. High salinity. Geological anomaly. Just bad luck for agriculture. But bring a Geiger counter. Walk the perimeter of Tel el Hammam. Watch the numbers climb. Listen to the clicking increase. Measure the radiation that should not be there. The stones do not lie. Fly over the Sinai Peninsula. Look at the satellite imagery. See the circular blast patterns, the overlapping destruction zones, the scars that are visible from space, but invisible to anyone who refuses to look. The Earth does not forget. Visit Mohenjo-Daro. Walk the ancient streets. See the skeletons still lying where they fell. Read the archaeological reports that describe radioactive remains. Note which sections of the site are restricted, which excavations were shut down, which questions are not allowed to be asked. The bodies do not decompose into convenient myths. The evidence is overwhelming. It is physical, it is measurable, it is distributed across 3 continents, and corroborated by dozens of independent sources. Ancient nuclear war happened. The texts describe it. The archaeology confirms it. The radiation proves it. But mainstream academia will not acknowledge it. The Vatican will not confirm it. Governments will not declassify what they know about it, because accepting this truth requires accepting everything that comes with it, that we are not the first technological civilization, that the Bible contains historical accounts, not just religious allegory, that ancient peoples had knowledge we are only now rediscovering, that human progress is not linear but cyclical, that we have been here before, and we destroyed ourselves before. These implications are too destabilizing, too threatening to established paradigms, too dangerous to institutional power structures, so the truth remains buried in restricted archives, in classified files, in academic journals that will not publish controversial findings, in museum storage rooms where radioactive tablets are kept away from public view. The cover-up is not a grand conspiracy. It is something more mundane and more insidious. It is thousands of small decisions, permits denied, funding withheld, papers rejected, researchers marginalized, evidence ignored, death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. But the evidence persists, because you cannot suppress radiation, you cannot classify geology, you cannot redact the chemical composition of desert glass. The physical world does not care about academic consensus or institutional politics. The vitrified walls still stand, the shocked quartz still exists, the isotope ratios still read wrong, and more people are noticing. Independent researchers, citizen scientists, people with Geiger counters and internet access, and the willingness to ask uncomfortable questions. The information is spreading, slowly, against resistance, but spreading nonetheless, because the truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. And once you understand what you are looking at, you see it everywhere. You see it in Genesis 19. Not divine punishment, but tactical nuclear strike. You see it in the era epos. Not mythology, but military chronicle. You see it in the archaeological evidence. Not anomaly, but pattern. You see it in the modern suppression. Not skepticism, but fear. Fear that if people knew the truth, they would ask the next logical question. If nuclear weapons destroyed civilization 4,000 years ago, what is stopping them from destroying civilization today? And that question has no comfortable answer. So the truth remains buried, hidden in plain sight, documented but denied, proven but dismissed. Sodom and Gomorrah were real cities. They were destroyed by real weapons. Their ruins still glow faintly in the desert night, and we are building the same weapons, aiming them at our own cities, walking the same path as Marduk and Ninurta. The warning is carved in stone, written in multiple languages, preserved across millennia, but we are not listening. We are too busy arguing about whether the warning is real, too invested in our current paradigms, too afraid of what acknowledging the truth would mean. So we ignore it, we suppress it, we bury it deeper, and the doomsday clock keeps ticking, closer to midnight, closer to repetition, closer to the moment when future archaeologists will excavate our ruins and wonder why we did not learn. The evidence is there, for anyone willing to look, for anyone brave enough to question, for anyone who wants to know the truth more than they want to maintain comfortable illusions. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by nuclear weapons 4,000 years ago. That is not theory. That is not speculation. That is documented, measurable, provable fact. The only question remaining is what we do with that knowledge. Do we learn from it? Or do we repeat it? The stones are still waiting for an answer, and time is running out.